As a commercial photographer, I'm always looking for gear and workflow solutions to not only make my life easier, but also my clients' experience better. And that's why I've teamed up with ProPhoto and Tether Tools to bring you my top 5 tips for photographing clients on location. What's going on, everybody? I'm Jeff Carpenter with Readylight Media and Next Level Workshops. I'm a commercial photographer based here in Nashville, Tennessee, and rather than me just rattling off a bunch of tips that probably won't mean anything to you, I thought I would bring you along to a shoot that I recently had with a client so you can actually see how I implement them into a real-life shooting situation. It goes without saying that all clients are going to be a little bit different, and they're all going to have their own specific needs. And that's why it's really important that you have a plan and that's really well thought out before you go into a shoot. And that brings me to my first tip, which is have a plan, but plan to pivot. My client for this shoot was a woodworking company based here in Nashville called Sawdust and Whiskey, and they're in the middle of a rebrand. So they brought me in to just shoot some content and some photos so they can roll that out with the rebrand. I knew this shoot would be a little bit different than maybe your standard headshot session because I was actually walking into an active wood shop that I was gonna have to work around the client. So rather than me going in and them setting aside part of their day to shoot, I actually went in and I was shooting around them doing their normal work. My plan for the initial shot here was to shoot some action and really get some sawdust flying in the background. And it just so happened that they were about to cut up a big old tree trunk with a chainsaw, so I went ahead and set up my lighting. Starting with my backlight, I had a ProPhoto B10X Plus with a 20-degree grid and a half cut of CTO gel. This allowed me to bring a little bit of warmth into the image that the client specifically asked for. And it also was gonna make sure that I could really catch those dust particles flying when they started cutting with the chainsaw. My key light was a B10X with a 3x4 softbox, and honestly, I'm more of an octabox guy, but the reason why I chose to shoot with the softbox with the rectangle was because all of the windows in this shop were rectangles. So if I got any shots that had any reflections or maybe catch lights in the eye, I wanted to make sure that that represented the environment we were in, and an octabox probably wasn't gonna do that. When you're shooting with the client on location, it's really important to be able to control your lighting because you don't always know what you're gonna be walking into. And that's why I love shooting with these ProPhoto B10X and B10X Plus lights, because they're really portable, they're really powerful, I know they're gonna get the job done every time, and they're gonna give me consistent color across the board regardless of the shooting situation I find myself in. Another thing that I really like about these ProPhoto lights is that these ones are battery powered, which really helps kind of keep everything clean so there's not cables running around that someone could trip on. I'm typically someone who, if I'm in a studio, I'm shooting on a tripod, but in this case, I knew I was gonna have to be moving around a lot to get a lot of different angles and make sure I was capturing everything I needed to. That's where the 31-foot tether cable really came in handy. It allowed me to move around freely and keep my tether station well out of the way of my client while they were doing their work. Because let's be real, the last thing I wanna do is get in the way of someone holding a chainsaw or have them trip over my gear. After we shot this setup for just a couple minutes, they were on to the next project that was in the warehouse next door. And that's kind of where being able to pivot comes into play. And that also brings me to my next tip, which is to really simplify your setup. I knew going into this shoot that I was probably gonna be moving gear around quite a bit, so I decided to stick with the 2-light setup, and also the foldable softboxes from ProPhoto made things really simple when I moved from one setup to the next. The second setup we did was very similar to the first one in the sense that it was the exact same lighting, but in this case, this warehouse had a window that I could play with and place my light in front of, which I think made the image a lot more believable, and it really looked like that light was coming through the window rather than just a light in the middle of a room. And I also brought in my 3x4 softbox as just a little bit of fill. I had it placed just outside the bay door just to kind of give a little bit of fill so the front of the image didn't fall completely black. One issue that I had to work around with this second setup was that this warehouse was a lot smaller than the previous spot we were shooting in. So I decided to leave my tether station outside. So I brought in my sunshade so we can actually see the images, and this also protected my computer from all the dust flying around from them cutting and planing the wood. Now, I can't say the same for myself or my camera, but now that we can see the images on the computer, that brings me to my third tip, which is make sure you collaborate with your client on set. And then what I mean by this is make sure you're showing them the images on your computer, because what's the point of tethering if not everybody's looking at them? So what this does is this does a couple things. So it allows them to see the images, and they might see something that maybe pertains to their industry that I am, as a photographer, am not gonna see. Maybe they're holding something different, or I'm just at a weird angle that doesn't show them or what they're doing in the best light. So by allowing them to look at the computer, that might even spark something where like, hey, like, I love this shot, but let's kind of pivot, let's do this thing over here. By allowing your clients to view the images as you're shooting them, it really helps make sure that they know what they're getting, you know that they know what they're getting, and it also helps to avoid overshooting. When I first started out in photography, I had this mentality that I should shoot way more images than I probably needed to, just to make it seem like my client was getting what they paid for. And it didn't really take me long to figure out that most clients, if not all clients, value time over sifting through thousands of images that all look exactly the same. By tethering on set and allowing my clients to view the images right away, it makes it so we don't shoot too many images, because a lot of times you might get the image you need within the first 10 frames. For this particular shoot, me and the client were all able to go through the images on my computer, make sure that they were happy with it, because honestly, one of the most stressful things in the world is driving home from a shoot and wondering if your client likes the photos. If you tether, you can just kind of throw that out the window. It also saves a ton of time in the long run, and that allows you to add more value to your client's shoot without wasting any time. And that brings me to the fifth and final tip, which is to offer more value and make more sales. Now, I don't know about you, but I didn't get into commercial photography to not make money, and any opportunity I can get to make a little extra, I'm gonna take it. Once we knocked out all the required content, we still had a little bit of time left over, which meant I could either pack up and head home early, or I could offer my clients something extra. In this case, I offered to shoot some headshots for their staff, which provided me with an extra opportunity to make some money on those edits. In an effort to keep things simple, I went ahead and just used the lights that I already had set up. So in the previous shot, I had a 4-foot octa and a 3x4 softbox. So I just moved those around. I used the 3x4 softbox as a kicker light, and I used the 4-foot octa as my key light. And I just threw them up in front of a bunch of slabs of wood that they had stored on the side of the warehouse, and used that as my setup. Now, I also wanted to make sure that I used a different lens. I had been shooting with a 24-105 lens for everything else. I wanted to shoot with a 70-200 lens for this, and I brought a 70-200 lens and had it on a backup camera body already in my bag. So I just went ahead and swapped out my camera rather than my lens. And the reason I did this was there was still quite a bit of dust floating around in the air from all the sanding and sawing and all that stuff. So I didn't want to risk getting any dust on my sensor. So I just went ahead and swapped out my camera rather than the lens. And by using the lever lock from Tether Tools, I was able to really quickly swap out my tether cable rather than like the old one where you had to take the whole tether plate off or grab a whole new cable. This way I could just pop it off, pop it back on the new camera, and we could get to shooting. All right, so there you have it. That is 5 tips that'll help you photograph your next client on location or in a studio. They really apply to both. But I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you want to see more videos like this, be sure to subscribe and follow Readylight Media, and head over to nextlevelworkshops.com for a free lighting guide. And if you have any questions or comments, leave those down below, and I'll see you next time.